Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here and taking time out of what I'm sure is a very busy day for you here at Pure. I'm very excited to be joined by Carolyn Mair this afternoon to talk about consumer behaviour, the psychology of fashion. First of all, unpacking what that even means, but I'm no doubt it's going to be a really interesting and insightful conversation. To give you a bit more of an introduction on Carolyn, she is a cognitive psychologist, chartered fellow of the British Psychological Society, and a business consultant. Carolyn holds a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, an MSc in research methods, and a BSc applied psychology and computing. In her early career, she worked as a visual merchandiser and graphic designer, and during her time as full professor of psychology for fashion at London College of Fashion, she established the university's psychology department and created the world's first MSc and BSc program to apply psychology, specifically in the context of fashion. She left academia in 2017 to establish her consultancy and work more closely with the fashion industry. Her book, The Psychology of Fashion, was published by Routledge in 2018 and is currently available in 5 different languages. Do you know which 5 different languages?
Yes. Okay, so in Korean, Chinese, Romanian, Serbian, English, and there's one more coming out, which I can't remember. Oh, so sorry.
That's impressive, though. Very impressive.
But it will be 6. Yeah.
So tell us a bit. What does the psychology of fashion entail for you?
Okay. Well, the psychology of fashion is really about people working in the fashion industry, people creating the fashion that we wear, and the people who wear the fashion that is created by the industry. So it's really about human behaviour right across the industry. So it includes the psychology of what we wear, how that expresses our identity, but it also includes the well-being of people working in the industry and of those who are manufacturers and producers for the industry.
And when we started discussing this talk and what you wanted to cover, you told me that you specifically don't call yourself a fashion psychologist. Can you tell us a bit about why that is?
Okay, so when I first kind of brought psychology to the fashion discipline, people were fascinated by it, which I hope you are as well, and wondering how do the two relate? How does psychology relate to fashion? But when we think about it, it makes perfect sense. You know, the clothes that we're wearing today did not just fall on us. I'm sure that when we came here, we thought about what are we going to wear? What are we going to wear to an event, a fashion event like this? We probably think about what we're going to wear when we go on a first date, or when we go to a party, or when we go to work, or when we go to a wedding, when we go to a funeral, anything, we tend to think about what we wear. And when we consciously think about what we wear, we can help facilitate the outcomes of the interactions we have with other people. So the psychology is hugely important in that. But also, what I'm particularly interested in is the person who's wearing the clothes more than the clothes on the person. So, I mean, the question that Olivia asked me, why do I not describe myself as a fashion psychologist? Because for me, the psychology comes first. It's about the person, as well as about the clothes, but it's not only about the clothes. So we can't talk about what does this mean. It means different things to different people. We bring our experiences with us when we wear something. We express our identity differently depending on our psychology. And the reason then that I don't call myself a fashion psychologist, very long answer here, is because it tend to be used by stylists rather than psychologists. And potentially they don't have training in psychology as I do. They're not psychologists, but they use styling as a kind of therapy. Now I want to be very careful that I'm not using styling as a therapy. I'm not a stylist, and I'm also not a therapist. I'm a cognitive psychologist, and I want that to be the main thing of my advice that I give to people. But also, what I'm as much interested in is the industry, how it treats its workers, how it pays the workers, and how it looks after the planet, and also how it looks after its consumers. So this end product that we talk about is only a very small part of my interest in fashion.
And as such a pioneer in this space, how did you come to work in it and define your own niche?
Well, I've always loved fashion. Always engaged with it. I used to design, started making clothes for my children, then I started making clothes for my friends and designing, changing patterns to try to make the clothes that I really loved, that I wasn't able to either afford or couldn't find. And then later on in my life, I trained as a psychologist, and my PhD was really theoretical, and I wanted to use some of the knowledge that I'd acquired over the years of my training to give a more instant result, I suppose, to have more impact faster than theory can. So when I had an opportunity to give a talk at London College of Fashion, I chose to speak about the psychology of fashion. In fact, I called my talk The Importance of Psychology in the Context of Fashion, where I highlighted every area, pretty much, in the industry where psychology matters. And there is no area, I would challenge anybody here today, to suggest one area in the fashion industry, from production right through to disposal, that doesn't involve psychology. So after I'd given the talk at London College of Fashion, I was invited back to create the department there, which was a fantastic opportunity. It was amazing. And then I wrote the 2 master's courses there were at the time there, the MSc and the MA. And then later on, I wrote the BSc, Psychology of Fashion. And they're all still running. I left in 2017. They were their flagship courses. I hope they still are. But they're very, very popular courses for students from all around the world.
And tell us about your next steps now, working as a consultant, and why you left academia to work more closely with the industry.
Oh, thank you. So if anybody here works in academia, knows a little bit about academia, you will know how slowly the wheels turn in academia. Very, very slowly. And I wanted to have a greater impact, or at least the psychology to have a greater impact in the industry. I saw the issues that were happening in the industry, the lack of inclusion and diversity, the problems with environmental damage, the other issues around sizing, around paying fair pay and good work conditions, also mental health of designers and models. I wanted to help the industry become more ethical and more sustainable. And so I left London College of Fashion, and I was an academic for 20 years, so I think I'd done my duty, and left in 2017 to set up my consultancy, and now I work with fashion brands, which I love. Yeah.
And what are some of the things that you're brought in to do for brands?
So I've worked in all sorts of different areas in the industry, particularly with diversity and inclusion, around sizing. So we're all familiar with the problems of sizing, how even within a brand, it's very difficult to find 2 items of clothing with the same size on that are actually the same fit. I've worked with sustainability, so that's environmental and social sustainability. Consumer insights, of course. I mean, that's quite often why people come to me. Why do we shop the way we do? How can we help consumers buy in a more mindful, sustainable way while still enabling the company to be profitable, which obviously is not an easy question. I've also worked with ethical AI, looking at why would consumers give their data to companies, what do they get in return, how can they trust the companies, also helping the people who work in AI work with data in such a way that it is less biased. So yeah, in that, what else have I worked in? Oh, research. So a lot of research, designing research studies that fashion brands can do, either large quantitative studies that might be global studies, but also focus groups, more nuanced focus groups for a particular niche market.
Sounds like endlessly fascinating work.
It
Never
is.
a dull day in the office, right?
It is, exactly, yeah, never a dull day. Yeah.
And what would you say are some of the key conversations that you're having with brands right now? What's really at the forefront of their minds?
Well, I think on the top of everyone's agenda at the moment is environmental sustainability. For brands that are not environmentally sustainable and can demonstrate that authentically and truthfully, they're going to be in great trouble soon, if not already. So environmental sustainability is on top of everyone's agenda. Finding new ways of developing materials, working with materials scientists, actually realizing in fashion brands that needing to collaborate with other brands, but also with professionals from different disciplines. So realizing you have to work with materials scientists, with chemists, with biologists, anthropologists, and psychologists like myself, but really getting to the crux of a problem that can't be solved simply by the same old people, well, not necessarily old, but same people in the fashion company that has always tried to solve problems. But I would say sustainability and inclusion, of course, those problems.
Yeah, let's dive into that, because I think when we talk about the environmental issues in the fashion industry, we don't necessarily think of psychologists as being a part of the role. Like, how can they and why should they be a part of that conversation as well?
Okay, so psychologists can help with supporting environmental sustainability in brands in many ways, in multiple ways. They can help consumers think more carefully about what they're buying and why they're buying it. Do they really want that item? So what I do is work with thinking. When we buy something, if we take it to the point of purchase, whether that's at a till in a retail store or online, we put it in our basket. If we walk away, if we shut the laptop or put the phone down, decide we're going to wait a little bit, research has found that 50% of people will not buy that item. So we can be swept up with the moment, we can get excited, and fashion is super tempting. We see something gorgeous, we just have to have it. But then we need to think about, do we already have that item in our wardrobe? Do we have something very similar to that in our wardrobe? Most of my wardrobe is black. And I go out and I think, oh, there's another black thing that I have to have. And then I think, well, no, I'm not going to buy that. I'm going to go and look at what I've already got. So that's one thing. So we can help change mindsets. We can help people think, what else can I do with my money rather than buy this item of clothing that I might not wear very often? And if I do buy it, how can I look after it? How can we change behavior? How can we change habits? So we talk about behavior change a lot, but the people who understand behavior are psychologists. So how can we change behavior? We look at what people do. Behavior is habit formation. So we can change it bit by bit. We understand what matters to people, what matters to me. So what we've seen a lot over the decades with some fashion activists trying to make consumers feel guilty about what they've bought, trying to blame them. And that's not a good way of changing behavior. If you make people feel guilty about something, they actually tend to want to do it more. So what we need to do is encourage people to think about what are the alternatives to the behavior they can do. So rather than spending whatever you spend on fashion, can you treat yourself in some other way? Can you find something more durable in your mind, more of an experience than simply something more material? And also we can work with producers to help with negotiations, because when we negotiate, that is also a cognitive process. Understanding how to negotiate is a mind matter, okay? So, psychologists can help brands negotiate far better with producers who work in different countries where they're a low pay anyway and poor working conditions for the typically women and minorities who are the producers of our clothes, and negotiate with them a better deal if that's possible.
And what does this mean for brands and retailers if we are trying to help consumers shop more consciously and shop better? That's great for consumers, that's great for the planet. Brands and retailers have spent a lot of energy trying to do the opposite and trying to drive sales. Where's that balancing point? That must be quite difficult.
It is difficult, and it is beginning to change though. I think now we're seeing so many resale brands doing very, very well. We're also seeing a movement towards buying from charity shops. That has increased massively over the last couple of years. But also seeing the resale, the swapping, the upcycling of our own clothes and sharing with people. And the fashion brands are collaborating with resale companies. Even like Selfridges has a resale department and a rental department. I forgot rental, but rental, of course. Her, the brand Her, is in Selfridges and doing fantastically well for a rental company. So trying to help and understand that this way they will still maintain their customer loyalty by also showing them that they are aware of the environmental damage that the industry is doing. And of course they will have to produce less by selling the resale in the fashion brand. It helps them understand the demand that then pushes the production figures.
So using your powers for good.
Exactly.
And another issue that comes up with sustainability, sticking on that, is the sort of values action gap from consumers. Consumers say they want sustainable, they want better materials, better quality clothes, but then they don't necessarily go and buy that. Talk us through the psychology of what's going on there.
Yes, so this is really interesting. So when we fill out a survey, which I'm sure everybody here has done, we tend to answer in a way that is socially desirable. We answer in a way that makes us, one, feel good, but look good to the people who are going to look at our results. Actually, it's probably a machine, but we still want to be socially desirable when we're answering the survey. But when the temptation hits, when we're either looking on our phones, on Instagram or however we shop, or in retail in the high street, we're tempted. And so what we said in the survey, we want to buy ethically, we want to buy sustainably, we're not going to shop for a year, or we're only going to buy secondhand for a year, and everything we say, we kind of forget it because the temptation is there so much. And so when you hear 75% of Gen Z are not going to shop this year, you have to take that with a pinch of salt, because that is not what happens in reality. What happens in reality is the temptation kicks in. But this is where we need to sort of activate our cognitive processes, and rather than just be kind of swept along with the temptation, to really think twice, to step back, to take a break, to leave it at the point of purchase. And if we still want it, really think about maybe cost per wear, or how are we going to look after it? What are we going to do with it afterwards so that we can prolong the use of that item and the number of people who can wear it, the length of life that item can have.
And you also mentioned inclusion as an area that you work closely with brands. Is that a space that you're seeing progress in or sticking points in?
So inclusion and diversity have come on a huge long way over the last 15 years, I would say. But one part of inclusion that is still ignored, and which is a subject very close to my heart, is the lack of inclusion of people with disabilities in the fashion industry. And it's so rare to see a brand, a global brand, showing fashion on people with disabilities and for people with disabilities. And it strikes me as a really unethical issue of the fashion industry, and it's one I fight for over and over, that the fashion industry looks at this huge population that spans all segments. It is the only population that spans all segments of consumers. So more than any of the other segments, even LGBTQA, we don't have very young children in that, but we do have very young children with disabilities who are not catered for. This is very, very slowly improving. So it's not, it's not terrible, and it is slightly on the way up, I would say, but it's not enough. The big brands who could do so much good by, showing models with disabilities and then not using them as tokens, but actually then producing the clothes that people with disabilities can wear. And they don't have to be special collections, because the arguments I've had with brands are, everyone's disability is different, you need to make different clothes for different disabilities. But actually, you can make clothes that all of us can enjoy by making, instead of buttons, these buttons are not easy to do up on this cardigan. Fortunately, I have mobility in my fingers. But you could have magnetic fasteners, you can have Velcro, you can have trousers with elasticated waist, you can have elasticated bottoms on trousers that don't flap about if people have very, very, thin legs, or one leg, that can be changed. There are so many things that brands can do to be inclusive in this space, and that for me is huge. So what I want to see is inclusion the way that we've seen the fashion industry really take on different skin tones. We're seeing that. And slightly a little bit more with size. Still not enough, but, there's a little bit more size inclusivity. Still not enough on that, but the disability segment tends to be ignored. And in the world, I think it's something like 16% of the world's population has a disability, and not all disabilities are visible. So quite a lot of people, for example, may have had some kind of trauma, or a car accident, or a fire or something, or some disease where they may have, for example, a colostomy bag or some other prosthesis that we can't see. And they want to look gorgeous as well. People with disabilities want to look lovely, the same as all of us do, and that's a basic psychological need, and I just want the fashion industry to do something about that.
Yeah, I believe there's a talk tomorrow with a brand called Unhidden.
I love
adaptive clothing. So if you're around tomorrow and want to know more about that, I'd recommend coming along.
They're amazing. Yeah, everybody here, come to that talk. Yeah, amazing. Unhidden. Yeah, tug for them.
Yeah, what is the impact of? I'm sure everyone here can relate in some way to maybe feeling excluded by something in fashion.
Yeah.
What is the impact of that?
Okay, so from a psychological point of view, when we're not included in fashion, we feel invisible, we feel ignored, it lowers our self-esteem. So self-esteem is a way we measure our self-perception based on the judgment of others, or our perceived judgment of others. It's not necessarily how it really is, but it's how we feel. Not being included in fashion, in the fashion industry, not seeing ourselves on posters or on the catwalk, or able to buy clothes when we look at them online or in a store, makes us feel invisible, makes us feel unworthy, makes us feel kind of unnecessary, as if we're not part of value anymore, undervalued. So it's super important. And we see more and more people saying, I want to see someone who looks like me. Whereas people in the fashion industry tended, and I think this is changing, well, I know it's changing, to believe that we all want to be inspired to see aspirational images. But actually, the research shows that we want to see people like us in imagery, so that we know when we go to get the clothes, it's going to look a bit like we look in them, that it's not going to look like completely different or just look awful.
Yeah, I think I certainly feel more favourably about brands that, you know, not everyone's going to look like me, obviously, but they look like my friends and my family and the world I see around me.
Exactly. Ordinary people. I'm just, look at this audience here. Everyone's different. Everyone's different. And some brands do use their consumers in the imagery, which is amazing. Yeah.
And you're all beautiful.
Yeah.
I've got a couple more questions I want to come to more on the kind of like well-being of workers side. But I did just wonder at this stage, because to make it a bit more interactive and rather than us just sitting chatting away, has anyone got any questions at this stage that they want to ask to Carolyn at all? Yes, question down here at the front. I think there's a mic coming round.
Try and open this water.
Yeah.
It's not worth getting yourself injured over. So basically, it's one of those kind of weird areas around influencer marketing and just the sheer, without going too deep in psychology, under 26-year-olds, the prefrontal cortex hasn't been formed. And so we have this onslaught on social media of buy me, buy me, buy me. So as you said, when when Gen Z say, oh, I'm not going to buy anything, you and I know they'll be doing a cheeky Shein haul within 10 seconds. So is there any studies going on or more research into how we can temper that addiction that young people are forming due to social media?
Great question.
Yes, great question. Less screen time. I mean, these problems are complex, but less screen time, you know, is clearly going to reduce the temptation. Also, finding ways that we can get self-care, rather than thinking buying clothes is a form of self-care, find a different way of caring for ourselves, of finding hobbies, interests that don't involve buying fashion, new fashion, or even buying fashion at all, actually. But yeah, ways of like what we could do with the money that we weren't spending on that clothes. Could we save it for maybe a holiday or an experience, a nice meal out, or something else? Screen time would be the number one for that. And the influencers understand that the reason influencers are influencers is because we want to be part of their community. We want to be part of their world, so that when we think we're dressing like them, or we might be copying their style, we feel we're like them, and by dressing like them, we can have their lifestyle. But clearly, you know, that isn't how it is. And that's the whole point of the influencer agenda, to make us believe that we can be like them. This social cohesion, that we can be part of their group and differentiate ourselves from other people. So it really is a mindset shift. We need to find other ways to look after ourselves, to feel better about ourselves. And that's another big problem, actually, that's just sprung into my mind. How do we feel better about ourselves when social media is telling us we have to look a particular way? And the fashion industry, we have to look this way. How can we feel better about ourselves? We can't do that unless we are included in the fashion industry in an authentic way. So
yeah, I find it really fascinating that sort of, you know, when social media first came in and sort of blogging culture of like the early 2000s, it was really praised for democratizing fashion and allowing average people to, you know, be experts on fashion and to see clothing worn by people who looked like everyday people. Yeah. And now it's just taken on all of the exact problems that the fashion industry perpetuated and made it tenfold. It's a bit...
yeah.
Any other questions at this stage? Yeah, one other. Karen behind you there.
Hi. So I worked as a buyer for a number of years, and I also have a degree in psychology. But having worked in the industry, we're very focused on profitability and making money. How do you sort of get the mindset change that it's not always about profitability, it's about doing the right thing in terms of sustainability or diversity? And do you think there's an element of jumping on a bandwagon with certain aspects of it?
Yeah, another great question. Thank you. So the fashion industry is obviously concerned, as is all industries, with profitability. But you can be profitable and sustainable or ethical and sustainable. And we're seeing a movement, as I just mentioned, with brands getting in resale, selling not only their old own brand stuff, but also other brands, collaborating with other brands, but also diversifying. So luxury brands did this ages ago. They moved into hotels and leisure, and I believe we'll see this with the more high street brands, the more value brands later on. They could do education, they could do experiences, this kind of thing where they could still be profitable. And also, a lot of their profits go on waste. So reducing waste by producing on demand rather than producing for supply. So an improvement in AI, in data science, in data analysis, improve the way that the algorithms are designed so that they're producing a better quantity rather than overproduction, which we might see the profits of a brand. They rarely publish the stock that they don't sell. So the stock in trade could be 50% of what they actually have. So reducing waste would make a huge difference to a brand's profitability, but also diversifying. Well, there's 100 things that brands could do, but I think primarily they need to produce less, all of them. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a few more questions myself, but we might have time for one more question at the end, depending on how quickly we get through this. Yeah. So we've just been talking about consumer psychology and I suppose well-being and finding ways to feel better about ourselves that don't involve hyperconsumption. For a number of reasons, that's good to do. But what about for the people working in the industry? Do you think that the fashion industry has a problem with worker well-being?
Yes. So do I think the fashion industry has a problem with worker well-being? Yes, I do, absolutely. We hear a lot about high-end professionals in fashion, designers, models, suffering from mental health issues. Several of them in the past, and unfortunately, hopefully, no more in the future, have taken their own lives through mental health issues. Lots of this is around the 24/7 culture that exists in the fashion industry, about having to be on form all the time, about having to kind of supersede your best at all levels. You do a fantastic collection, you have to be even better the next time. It's just relentless. And this is the top end that we hear about. But then we look at the workers, the runners, the interns, who we don't hear about, who also are suffering in their mental health through the demands of the fashion industry. Models in particular have spoken out about how they are treated like clothes hangers. They're not even called by their names, many of them, and several of them have been told to slim down to the bone, and when they get very, very thin, they're told it's still not thin enough. So there is a book by a French model, Victoria Dozier, I think her name is, and her book is called Not Thin Enough, where she talks about this, and she gets thinner and thinner, and she's still not thin enough. And she's not the only one, obviously. So this is the top end. She was a top model in fashion. But then we look at the people working in the industry, the people who work in the factories, who produce the fashion, who have either unsafe or unethical environments to work in. And that is not always only a problem of the fashion brands. And I say this here, it's a very complex issues that are politically motivated in lots of the countries that our fashion is produced in. So it's a very complex. Most global fashion brands don't own their own factories. They share them with multiple brands, including luxury brands who also have workers exposed to exactly the same poor conditions and poor wages. So it's not only the fast fashion brands here who are the culprits, although they are culprits too.
And what would be your advice to anyone who feels like they're struggling with their work-life balance at the moment?
Okay, so it's hard to manage work-life balance when we have so many demands at the moment. With the cost of living, the being environmentally careful, but we need to look after ourselves first, because if we lose our physical or psychological health and have problems in either of those areas, they're connected. So our psychological health affects our physical health affects our psychological health. We need to practice some self-care. We need to think about taking time for ourselves. So maybe relaxation, get a hobby, an interest. Walking in nature is hugely beneficial. There's an overwhelming amount of research, evidence that suggests a brief walk in nature can really boost your well-being. Sort of trying to look at flexible options at work. Can you work flexi-time? Can you work hybrid? Can you work from home? Maybe 1 or 2 days a week? Can you learn to say no and delegate? You know, you don't have to say yes to everything that everyone asks you to do. You can say no. To be able to speak openly, to practice open communication. If you have a problem at work, seek to find someone who can help you talk about it, work it out. If that doesn't exist at work, then you probably have to go outside work to find someone, and it might be this is the trigger to get another job, if possible. Yeah, really take time to focus on what matters to you and have boundaries. Boundaries are really important. Fix the time that you say, I'm not working after this time. I'm not going to work after whatever o'clock, and I'm not working at weekends. I'm not going to answer emails. And good bosses will not send emails at weekends or after work. And if they do, you shouldn't answer them.
There's also a scheduling function now. Like, there's literally no reason to send an email on the weekend.
Exactly. Oh, awful.
And what would be your advice to any business owners or people working with people who maybe might be struggling with their mental health? How can they support them?
Right. Okay, great question. So for business owners here or employers in general, I think having psychological safety in your workplace is super important. So psychological safety means having an environment where your workers feel confident and open enough to speak about any issues they're having. That might be personal or it might be about the workplace, without the fear of negative reprisals for speaking out. So it should be a safe environment. Psychological safety is really important. If you don't have it in your company, people are just going to talk behind other people's backs. The talking is going to go on and it's going to kind of fester. So being able to speak about issues openly in an environment where it's safe to do so is really important. If you employ other people, you should be a role model for good behaviour, for good work-life balance, not send emails outside working hours, and also take time for yourself. You know, look after your own well-being and have a physical environment that also fosters well-being. So it's safe at work. People are not taking risks. I'm sure there's lots of other things too.
Maybe we've got time for one more question from the audience before we wrap up. Yeah, sorry, this lady with the hairband on.
Thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. My question is, a way to be sustainable for a brand could be do as a pre-order, collection as a pre-order. And I'm just wondering if there's any strategy as a brand in terms of consuming behavior that could make this a lot more sustainable or profitable, not sustainable, but like a long-term business plan.
But that was for pre-order fashion, whether that's a long-term sustainable strategy?
Yes, any strategy to help with consumer behavior and be able to sustain that as a strategy as a brand.
Could you repeat that?
Sorry. Yes, it's a little bit quiet. Yes, could pre-order fashion, so making to order, be a helpful tool to curb consumption and help train a kind of positive consumer mindset?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But for a global brand, mass market, that's quite difficult. But this is where AI comes in. If it's accurate, the predictions are accurate, and which is easier said than done, obviously, but it's not just a question of throwing in a load of data into a machine and seeing what comes out. It's really about understanding consumers. So not just looking at what they've bought in the past, but looking at what they spend their money on when they're not buying clothes. What are they talking about when they're not buying clothes? What are their other interests? How can we engage with the consumers in a sustainable way by giving them what they want? I think that's super important. So yeah, before the production, super important. Yeah, and that can happen in multiple ways. So through research, I think, is number one. So not just looking at the data that brands already are collecting now, but haven't done so much in the past. But also, it's not just about the number of T-shirts we buy. What are we doing with the rest of our lives? And what we can find, like when people follow particular music genres, they dress in that way. How can we align people's interests and values with the products that our brand is selling and appeal to that market? So it is, it's very much thinking about what are we doing with what we produce? How can we make sure that what we produce is going to sell? And then we reduce waste as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with like the proliferation of fashion products dropping and low prices, it's really taught us to have instant gratification with fashion. And I think something like pre-order can give you that really lovely delayed gratification where you love something even more because you've waited for it. I think maybe the danger is when it becomes a bit like hype culture and you like really massively, again, create a bit too much drama over a product drop, and that can then go against what your intentions are with that as well. I would love to sit and chat for the whole rest of the afternoon, but I know there's another lots of great talks and catwalks and things to come. But Carolyn, you're going to be about for a few more minutes afterwards if anyone has any more questions or anything. And I will be at the Sustainability Hub for the rest of the day, if I can give that a little plug as well, if you want to come chat sustainability with me and download our sustainability toolkit, talk about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, of which SDG 3 is good health and well-being, so that fits in really nicely with this.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for your attention, and have a very nice rest of the show.
Thank you.